12 worst Tarzans in Hollywood history. Remember when Saturday meant errands done by noon and the living room set warming up in the corner? Some Tarzans passed the living room test the second they stepped into frame. You felt the leaves lean in. Others didn't. Studios kept tinkering, pasting in old animal reels, ironing the rough edges for TV, or polishing the hero until he looked ready for an airport lounge. Muscles can be cast. That twitch of danger in the eyes, that's rarer. And when that spark isn't there, the room starts checking the clock. We're not here to swat at your memories. We're here to name what slipped, timing that arrived late, scripts that made the wild behave, productions that dressed the jungle in wallpaper, and a few beautiful statues that forgot to breathe. This will be quick, plain talk, one name at a time, no fluff. Let's start at the roots. The man who opened the door for everyone else and showed how easy it is to get stuck at the threshold. Number 12, Elmo Lincoln, the first who got stuck in silence. Before the jungle had a voice, it had a stare. Elmo Lincoln's barrel chest and clenched jaw gave early audiences a brand new kind of hero. In those silent reels, bigger meant bolder, and broad gestures did the talking. For its moment, his Tarzan felt monumental. Straight lines, simple beats, fists that solved problems. Many of us met the name Tarzan through still photos of Lincoln's pose. He looked like a statue that could step down and snap a vine in half. But time changes what we ask from a legend. When sound arrived and storytelling grew subtler, that same pose turned stiff. 1918 cheered chest thumping. By sound era standards, it played like stage business. The eyes rarely told a story. The movements shouted it. Lincoln returned a few times, but mostly as a memory of himself. Glimpses that nodded to the past more than they pushed the character forward. And that's the rub. Being first is an honor, not a guarantee. He built the doorway. Others learned how to walk through it with nuance. If you watch those old prints on weekend TV, you probably admired the sheer force, and then wished the jungle would breathe a little. If the pioneer proved size alone can't carry a myth, then number 11 shows what happens when Tarzan barely gets to be the star of his own story. Number 11, P. Dempsey Tabler, the jungle ghost who drifted off-screen. You and I both remember the thrill of a Saturday serial, but the son of Tarzan asked us to cheer while Tarzan himself stood off to the side. P. Dempsey Tabler wore the name, yet the chapters kept handing the urgency to Korak, the son. 15 chapters made Korak the cliffhanger engine. Tarzan re-entered like supervision, not fire. Tabler had the frame and a performer's bearing from his opera days. On paper, he checked boxes. On screen, the gestures ran large and the eyes stayed distant. Even for the silent era, where exaggeration was the norm, his rhythm felt a half-beat behind. More tableau than life. Older makeup didn't help, nor did staging that treated Tarzan like a cameo. Scenes arrived and left without that electric charge you want from the name above the title. You could sense the filmmakers hedging, let the boy carry it. Dad can stand noble. Fine for family drama, fatal for jungle myth. A hero needs moments that breathe, stalk, explode. Tabler got entrances and exits. By the time a chapter finally wanted him to seize the frame, the habit of standing aside had set in. Viewers shrugged and waited for the kid again. We aren't taking a swing at your memories. We're just naming the feeling you probably had without putting words to it. You watched, you waited, you hoped the camera would wake up, and then it moved on. If a Tarzan can't command the river of the story, then number 10 shows how even a strong jaw and the best connections in town can't force the current to bend. Number 10, James Pierce. Tarzan by family ties, not by fire. Some names arrive by thunder, others arrive by introduction. James Pierce had the build and the blessing. He impressed Edgar Rice Burroughs, married Burroughs' daughter, and stepped into Tarzan and the Golden Lion with the confidence of a man welcomed to the head of the table. Many of us first saw him in stills, square shoulders, steady chin, and thought, that'll do, but the screen is a tougher judge than a photograph. Once the reels turned, the movements looked careful, almost classroom neat. You could feel him trying to honor the myth, yet the wildness never quite crossed the eyes. The jungle needs breath and instinct. Pierce gave us posture. The silent format didn't help. Without a voice to color intention, his expressions sat in the safe middle, never truly feral, never truly tender. The plot pushed forward, but the pulse stayed low. It wasn't a disaster. It was a polite nod where a growl was required. Ironically, his radio Tarzan works. Voice paints danger his close-ups never quite did. On film, though, he felt like a capable stand-in who kept the place warm until the animal spirit returned. If connection and muscle can't conjure danger, then the next lesson is harsher. Even a natural athlete with star charisma in other roles can look like a visitor when the jungle refuses him. Number 9. Buster Crabbe. Flash Gordon in, Tarzan out. If you owned those old chapter play booklets or caught matinees with a nickel in your pocket, you remember Buster Crabbe as a hero who flew on imagination alone. As Flash Gordon, he lit up the screen. As Tarzan in Tarzan, the Fearless, he looked ready, swimmer's build, clean profile, the stride of a champion. Then, the film undercut him. What most folks saw wasn't a full-blooded feature, but a stitched-down version of a serial, a 60-minute feature cut-down that felt like highlights, not a hunt. The jungle never got time to breathe. One moment promised menace. The next jumped rails to a cliffhanger beat that didn't quite land. You could sense the editor's scissors more than the character's heartbeat. Crabbe moved well, but the eyes stayed too civilized. The smile too matinee bright. That charm was gold in the stars and ray gun worlds. In the trees, it read as visiting gentlemen. Tarzan needs an element of uncertainty, as if something untamed might break loose mid-swing. Here, the danger came trimmed and tidy. Even the apes felt oddly arranged, more parade than threat. When the climax arrived, you didn't feel pulled into a living jungle. You felt escorted through a highlight reel. No actor can muscle past a format that keeps deflating the moment just as it builds. None of this knocks the pleasure of Crabbe's better adventures. We cheered those too. It names why this one never settled into the legend. If a hero can be framed right in space, but wrong on Earth. Then number 8 shows how the opposite problem plays out. A Tarzan closer to the author's mind who still couldn't make the camera believe. Number 8, Bruce Bennett, Herman Bricks. The right Tarzan in the wrong machine. If you've leafed through old fan magazines, you know Herman Bricks looked like the role was carved on him. Broad shoulders, spring in the step, an athlete's carriage. Under the name Bruce Bennett, he gave us a Tarzan closer to Edgar Rice Burroughs' book, Man. Articulate, alert, a civilized mind inside a feral setting. On paper, that's a win. On screen, the machine around him jammed. The New Adventures of Tarzan was shot far from Hollywood comforts. Guatemala heat and rough location sound bled tension. Good intentions cooled on the track, and you can feel the production fighting the story. Dialogue lands thin, suspense arrives in pieces, and the pacing stalls where it should stalk. Bennett stands there looking exactly right, and somehow you don't feel the jungle press in. It isn't that he's false, he's careful. Words sit where growls should edge them. The eyes read thoughtful when danger needs to flicker. We older viewers appreciate the attempt to honor the novels, but cinema wants heat, not homework. The serial format repeats dilemmas, reposes questions, and sands off the sense of risk. By the end, you respect the effort and miss the spark. If a faithful blueprint can still build a cool house, then number 7 shows how stepping straight into a legend's footprint can make even a handsome heir feel strangely small. Number 7, Lex Barker, the heir who played it safe. Handsome, tall, and camera true, Lex Barker arrived like a studio answer key. After Johnny Weissmuller, the vines were still warm, and Tarzan's magic fountain asked him to keep the spell without breaking a sweat. He did, competently. Full sentences replaced grunts, the posture stayed regal, and the fights felt tidy. But the wild voltage never quite crackled. You could sense him minding the legend rather than wearing it, as if the role were a suit to keep pressed. The scripts didn't help. Poacher peril rescue loops, competent, predictable, and memory light. Barker carried the pictures like a polite host, guiding us through familiar trails where danger should have prowled. For those of us who grew up on Saturday matinees, he was easy to watch and easier to forget. The eyes were steady. They rarely flashed. The yell was correct. It rarely cut to the bone. Later, Europe found uses for his presence and turned him into a star. Proof the man wasn't the problem. The jungle simply wanted a little madness in the margins, a flicker that said the rules might break. Barker's Tarzan kept the rules ironed. If a careful air can't kindle the campfire, then number 6 shows what happens when a born stuntman finally wins the role. But time and mileage dull the spark just when the jungle needs flame. Number 6, Jock Mahoney, the stuntman who arrived a step late. Some fellows were born to move. Jock Mahoney could vault a fence, skip a handrail, and make gravity look negotiable. For years, he was the man behind other men, the double who made stars seem braver. By the time the loincloth finally came his way with Tarzan Goes to India and Tarzan's 3 challenges, he'd earned it twice over. But the calendar doesn't bargain. At 44, lean as rawhide and tough as a boot heel, he could still thread a perilous ledge. What he couldn't fake was youth's flash in the eyes. You and I have seen this before, the body still willing, the spark a half step slow. On camera he was precise, even graceful. Punches landed clean, leaps read honest, and the camera trusted him because he'd spent a career earning that trust. What you missed was the feral pulse between lines, the sense that something untamed might snap free. He tended to explain the jungle instead of make it hush. Part of that came from the productions themselves, long, punishing shoots in brutal conditions that took a bite out of him. Illness on 3, challenges thinned him. Precision stayed, but menace ebbed. Tarzan doesn't need speeches, but he does need heat. And Mahoney often felt like a veteran foreman keeping order rather than a wild sovereign staking claim. Still, you respect the man. When the stunt is real, our generation spots it instantly, and Mahoney's reel is full of the genuine article. The tragedy is that he got the nameplate after the honeymoon. What might have been electric a decade earlier became admirable instead of unforgettable. If the right craftsman can't outrun time, then number 5 shows how television tried to solve the problem by sanding Tarzan smooth, and discovered that weekly polish can rub the wild right off. Number 5, Ron Ely, the weekly hero who got too house-trained. If you had a dependable TV set and a favorite chair, you probably spent Thursday nights with Ron Ely. He looked every inch the part. Tall, clean lines, the kind of profile that made network promos easy to cut. And for 2 seasons, he did something no one else on this list did. He showed up as Tarzan week after week. That reliability was both his badge and his burden. The series wanted a family hour, not a fever dream. So the jungle became tidy. Poachers with neat motives, lost scientists with clear ethics, and a noble jungle guardian who solved trouble like a park ranger with perfect posture. Ely spoke in full thoughts, weighed choices, and delivered measured wisdom. Admirable? Sure. Primal? Not often. To his credit, he paid in bruises. He did his own fights and falls, and you can see the commitment in the way he moves through brush and rock. Our generation respects that. No rubber stamp there, but the format kept filing the edges flat. Thursday reset. Bruises for him. Declawed peril for us. Even when the choreography popped, the eyes rarely flashed that something might break glint that makes Tarzan Tarzan. He was a fine host of the jungle rather than a force sprung from it. If you loved the show, you loved the ritual, the theme, the promise, the comfort that the vines would hold, and justice would come in under an hour. That's television doing what television does. But myth needs a little danger, humming under the floorboards. And the series kept turning the volume down. Ely deserves respect for carrying the name and taking the knocks. The reason he lands on this list isn't heart or effort. It's that the weekly polish smoothed away the roar. If TV trimmed the claws for the living room, then number 4 shows how a different 1960s fix sharpened them in the wrong direction by swapping jungle soul for spy movie cool. Number 4, Mike Henry, the loincloth that tried on a tux. If you remember movie posters from the late 60s, you remember this face, tall, cut from granite, the sort of jaw that made advertisers grin. Mike Henry walked into Tarzan and the Valley of Gold, looking like the casting department had solved the riddle. Finally, a modern physique that read from the back row. Then, the movies changed the recipe. Out went the damp, breathing jungle. In came sleek locations, cool entrances, and set pieces that felt closer to spycraft than survival. Tarzan strolled cities, dealt with henchmen, and handled problems with the calm of a secret agent on holiday. The camera loved Henry's stillness. The jungle didn't. A feral king needs danger in the eyes. Here, the eyes said, "Mission accepted." On paper, it sounded smart. Update the hero, keep pace with the decade, give audiences a quicker fuse and bigger booms. But you and I watched that change land with a thud. The roar turned into a pose. When the action hit, it was crisp. When the quiet came, it was empty. You didn't feel the weight of leaves or the hush that tells you something wild is listening. Instead, you felt angles, wardrobes, and a tone that kept checking its cufflinks. The next two films stayed on that course. Competent, glossy, short on pulse. You could admire Henry's bearing, and still miss the man who ought to look like he could vanish into vines and reappear above your shoulder. Behind the screen, the work was bruising. Shoots were rough, injuries piled up. By the third outing, the wear showed, and the enthusiasm didn't. That's not a jab at the man. It's a truth older viewers know from life. Sometimes the job looks perfect from the sidewalk and grinds you down once you step inside. Henry carried himself like a pro through most of it, but the character never felt at home in the sleek new clothes. The films kept saying efficient when the role begs for untamed. Bond in a loincloth was the wrong gloss. If turning Tarzan into a gentleman adventurer steals the heartbeat, then number 3 proves the opposite mistake can be just as fatal, when the production fakes a jungle around a decent athlete and hopes you won't notice the seams. Number 3, Denny Miller, the first color Tarzan, washed out by paste and scissors. If you remember walking into a matinee and marveling when familiar faces finally showed up in color, you know the promise that 1959 carried. Denny Miller had the height, the shoulders, and a California brightness that read well in the new palette. In the posters, he looked like the jungle finally turned the page from sepia to sunrise. Then the projector started, and the movie kept cheating. Whole stretches were stitched together from yesterday's reels. Animals that didn't match angles, chases that didn't quite connect. Stock shots spliced mid-chase. Even the season jumps between angles. Instead of a breathing jungle, you got a scrapbook of jungles pasted down with visible glue. Miller himself wasn't the problem. You can see the kid doing the work. He trained, he hit his marks, he took the bumps, but the film around him treated Tarzan like a sightseeing guide who wandered in and out between stock inserts. Dialogue came thin, character came thinner, and the camera rarely lingered long enough for the eyes to spark. You and I have sat through pictures saved by a strong lead. This was the reverse, an earnest lead stranded by a production that kept stepping on the gas and the brakes at once. The result wasn't bad enough to laugh at, it was flat enough to forget, and that's worse for a legend. Color should have made the leaves whisper and the river glint danger. Here, color just highlighted the seams. The muscle was there, the lungs were willing, but the myth needs more than a good frame. It needs a world that believes in itself. In this entry, the world flickered like a TV set with a loose cable. You left the theater remembering the novelty of Hugh and little else. If a bright coat of paint can't hide a hollow wall, then number 2 shows how the opposite sin drains the room. When a Tarzan is sculpted perfectly, then told to stand there and say almost nothing. Number 2, Miles O'Keefe, the beautiful statue that wouldn't speak. If you remember the early 80s video shelves, the ones with glossy boxes and breathy taglines, you remember the hype around Tarzan, the ape man. The poster promised sweat and thunder. What the movie delivered was a mirror tilted the wrong way. The camera married Jane. Tarzan stood gorgeous and underwritten. Miles O'Keefe looked carved by the vines themselves. Tall, symmetrical, the kind of frame that made publicists exhale. Then, the reels rolled, and he barely spoke. Not moody silent, not mythic silent, simply unused. Scenes asked him to glisten, pose, and stand in slow motion, while the story floated around him like mist that never turned to rain. Older viewers like us can spot the feeling. You're waiting for the moment the hero takes charge, the flicker in the eyes, the forward step that tells you the jungle just chose its king. It never arrives. The film keeps steering back to Jane's sparkles and soft focus, and Tarzan becomes a handsome landmark the camera can't stop photographing. Without words, there's no arc. Without choices, there's no character. Even the physicality feels curated instead of dangerous, like a fitness calendar left out in the weather. The famous yell? More echo than event. You leave with impressions, not memories. Critics had their fun at the time, and audiences who came for a pulse got a postcard. That's the real failure. Not that O'Keefe looked too perfect, but that the producers trusted the look so completely, they forgot to give him a heartbeat. Tarzan isn't a cologne ad. He's a test of nerve and nature. Mud on the feet, thorn in the skin, and a decision every 5 minutes that might draw blood. Reduce him to framing and sheen, and you've lost the lion in the man. If a statue can't rule a jungle, then number one is the crueler lesson our generation already knows. Medals don't crown a king of the trees. Charisma does. Number one, Glenn Morris, gold medal, lead feat. You remember that summer of 1936 headlines? How a decathlete from Colorado wore the stars like armor and beat the world. Glenn Morris had shoulders that looked lathe-turned and a jaw that belonged on a coin. Hollywood took one look and said, "There's our Tarzan." On paper, it made sense. The decathlon is grit plus grace. 10 events demand balance, speed, will. But film is a different event entirely. In Tarzan's Revenge, 1938, Morris stepped from podium to jungle, and the camera waited for the spark. It didn't come. He moved like a man still hearing a starter's pistol, strong in the limbs, uncertain in the eyes. Dialogue was kept to a minimum, which should have helped, yet even the silences didn't hum. A light romance caper frame can't carry a feral myth. The hush never arrives. You wanted that old living room hush we remember, the feeling that the jungle itself was watching. Instead, scenes passed like parade floats, colorful, tidy, quickly gone. The picture didn't do him favors. The tone wandered between light romance and jungle caper. Never choosing feral or playful, that's a tough fence for any actor to ride. Tougher still for a newcomer asked to carry the myth on posture alone. Eleanor Holm, another Olympian, made a game Jane, but the pair felt like guests at their own adventure. Staged danger stays staged. You can see it in how the cuts land and how the air never quite tightens. When Morris swung, you admired the form. When he landed, nothing trembled. Tarzan needs menace in the quiet. Eyes that suggest a choice just got made, and somebody won't like it. Morris's gaze stayed straightforward, almost polite, as if he were waiting for the next whistle. None of this erases what the man accomplished on a track watched by a hostile world. That triumph stands tall. It just reminds us of an older truth our generation learned from long weekends with the TV guide. Athletics and acting share discipline, not destiny. A champion's lungs can't manufacture screen heat. The jungle chooses its kings by something we can't measure. Call it voltage, call it mystery. Tarzan's Revenge tried to graft that mystery onto a great athlete and wound up with postcard moments where a pulse should be. If medals crowned movie monarchs, this list wouldn't exist. But the Vines answer charisma, not credentials. And that's why Glenn Morris, for all the glory he earned elsewhere, finishes at number one on the worst fit side of the legend. If you've walked this whole trail with me, you've felt the pattern. Muscle without mystery falls flat, and a famous name can't outshout a weak idea. The jungle answers to presence. Those quiet seconds when a man looks past the camera and you believe the leaves just leaned in. Some entries on our list were brave tries trapped by budgets. Others were strong bodies given the wrong tone. We older viewers know the feeling from life. The tools matter, but timing and truth matter more. So here's the takeaway that keeps the legend alive. Tarzan works when the eyes say danger and mercy live in the same man, when the world around him breathes instead of blares, and when the story lets the wild stay a little wild. That's why some versions linger and some fade like matinee posters in a shop window. Move one up and one down. Who trades places on your list? And if you want the flip side, stay with me. If you missed the 10 hottest Tarzans, watch it next.